Thank you very much. And it's wonderful to be here. And thank you very much for inviting me. When I was asked to come to do this seminar, I reflected on what might be useful. And I talked to some colleagues here at Hong Kong U to get their ideas as to what would be most relevant. My sense is looking at this issue of challenging higher education practices, technology catalyzing change in post-COVID times, is to actually look broadly at higher education institutions and looking at that under a particular set of spectacles, looking at it in terms of broad leadership models of change. And to do that, I will get an introduction to, I'll give you an introduction to the university of which I belong now, which is University of New South Wales, and then make some reflective comments about similarities and differences with the University of Hong Kong, because my belief is, or I see them as both strong research-led institutions, Hong Kong U being an extremely important and old and traditional university with a lot of values that affect the way its culture and affect the way that it conducts education as well. And whereas UNSW is a much younger university, came up in the 1960s, it was formed, and so the structures of those two universities mean that the results can be somewhat different in terms of change. Both can learn a lot from each other. And it's wonderful to have been working in both those institutions. And I hope to be able to share some of those thoughts with you today. Okay, so the context of my talk will be around systemic changes initiated prior to COVID and then accelerated during the pandemic and consolidated post-COVID. I think we'd all agree that the COVID times have broadly resulted in more acceptance of digital learning. It's not always been plain sailing, and as was introduced earlier in the introduction, there are some advantages and disadvantages and some problems with quickly moving into a digital world where we had to engage our students in a non-face-to-face way. So I'll talk a little about that. I'll talk about the opportunities for sustained innovation in teaching and learning practices. And I'll also talk about the digital focus demanding adjustments to how we learn and teach. Obviously, as you start to move more mainstream, as anyone starts to move more mainstream into teaching and learning with and through technology, you're not teaching and learning in the same way that you did without the technology. Technology has certain things, certain biases, certain ways that allows us to work and actually prevents us from working some of those things that we did purely in a face-to-face way. So I'll talk a little about that too. In this seminar, I also want to review cases from UNSW that focus on improving the quality of learning with a focus on curriculum and course design and capability building in sustaining systemic change and innovation in learning and teaching with and through technology. And I want to explore the experiences shared and the lessons that we've learned that could be adopted and adapted to other institutions in a post-COVID pandemic era. So the model that I want to use that sort of got me thinking for today is one that was developed some time ago and became particularly influential in my mind when I first came to Hong Kong U, when I was working in the Faculty of Education with Professor Nancy Law and colleagues. Their book that came out on changing classrooms in 2000. And the model they were looking at in that was leadership models. 3 leadership models they used. They talked about technological adoption, catalytic integration, and cultural integration. The model that does refer, I believe, to UNSW is catalytic integration, where there is visionary leadership and institutional philosophy and strategy, engages the institution in continuous reform, engages staff and students in a process as members of a learning organization. And I think that's very important. As an institution, it has more of a holistic approach and a systemic approach of affecting institution-wide change. And I'll talk more about this in detail. Its use of technology in learning and teaching is deliberate and designed as an integral part of the curriculum, consistent with the institutional ethos. And its leadership change agent with a clear vision and implementation strategy with staff professional development, focusing on curriculum tailoring and pedagogical innovation as the key elements. And I'll go into the details of why I believe that UNSW fits this particular model well. Okay, so the third leadership model that I want to talk about is cultural integration model. And here we've got strong cultural and historical foundations that results in a distinctive institution vision focusing on student empowerment. I see this is very typical of what happens here at Hong Kong U. It kind of fits broadly into this. Well-established student organizations and good multi-age interactions as an institutional tradition. The realization of students' individual potential and development of self-actualization, lifelong learning ability is emphasized the most. And ICT is mainly seen as an empowering tool, both for students and for teachers. So I think this fits Hong Kong U well. Right, so just to talk about UNSW, and then as we go through this talk, I hope to make kind of comparisons and maybe some questions about how we could learn from each other in terms of institutions. So UNSW's vision was to be very definitely both a research and an education-intensive university. It wanted to be seen nationally and internationally as an education-intensive university. It has a reputation since its inception for being a research-intensive university, and that's great, but it wanted to be more than that. It's a large institution, 65,000 students. There are over 1,000 plus award programs, 7,500 courses. Developed a university strategic plan, which went over 10 years, 2015 to 2025. The entire institution was engaged in developing and discussing what we needed, what they felt to meet this vision of being both a research and an education-intensive university. And through a process of a year plus, almost 2 years, we went through lots of discussion, lots of reviews between students, between teachers and partners, essentially as members of the learning organization, thinking of how we could move this institution forward. And doing this, technology and technological practices was seen very much as a catalyst for change. We could use technology to help us catalyze, to speed up the process of change. So how did we actually implement this? Well, we put aside a very large sum of money. The institution put aside a great deal of money in the millions of Australian dollars, millions and millions, for education and online initiatives across a 10-year period. And the projects were adjusted in 2019 and 20 due to COVID and all the things that COVID required us to adjust, in the sense of quite suddenly. For example, we had no face-to-face or virtually no face-to-face assessment. Suddenly we had to move into an entirely online form of assessment. So that I think is a very interesting thing. We adopted, as far as we could, systemic approaches to change and the central role of capability building and elevating the status of learning and teaching. When I say capability building, I'm looking particularly at teachers, but also students as well. How can we increase their capability? How can we increase their understanding of how you use, for example, technology to better improve the situation as far as teaching and learning is concerned? So we really focused on the need for providing opportunities for capability building in a long-term way. We also wanted to look at technology solutions for improving learning, and curriculum revision and review of our policies and guidelines. We saw how important it was to make changes to the university level policies that had an impact on the curriculum across the entire university through the centralized committees we had with regards to teaching, learning, and curriculum. If we provided them with a cleaned up, simplified, more purposeful vision of what we wanted the curriculum to be, then that could be filtered into the policies and then also included in the procedures as well, for how faculties could then make the necessary changes in order to conform to the university's vision and strategy. And this is a big thing to do. It's a very big thing to do. It could only be done with universities that would fit into this catalytic integration model. So in terms of capability building, I'd like to just draw your attention to, I think, one of the key things that were done during this period, which was the creation of education-focused careers. So we saw academics being distracted, perhaps, by their careers, only really rewarding them in a major way for the research output. And although that is very good to have that research output, you could hear stories from teachers saying, yeah, I'd love to focus more on my teaching, but I can't because I have to focus on the research output in order to get the promotion, in order to get my tenure, etc. I'd love to have the time, but I don't. So what the university did was actually create education-focused careers. This gave teachers, academics, an opportunity to stop researching. We gave them an opportunity over a 5-year period. You can extend that beyond 5 years, but for 5 years, you don't need to output research, okay? And instead, you can focus on your teaching. You can focus on improving student learning. So this is, I think, quite an interesting topic. We started with a relatively small number of people that got engaged in this, and we now have something like 450 academics, which have now switched to an education-focused career. That link will take you to a website that will provide you a lot more detail if you're interested in following that up more. And we felt that having that many staff involved in being education-focused created a critical mass for the change that we wanted to make in terms of the vision we had of making our university more focused around not just research, but education. So if we look around Australia, and then indeed if we look around the world, you'll find out that UNSW is not the only university that's involved in education careers. So in Australia, if we look at the G08 universities, these are the top universities in terms of output and research in Australia. So the University of Queensland, University of Melbourne, Monash University, University of Sydney, University of Adelaide, and University of Western Australia, and ourselves, we're all G08 universities, the top research-led universities in Australia. We all have research-focused models for teachers to take, and teachers can get promoted from lecturer to senior lecturer in education focus, but also from senior lecturer to associate professor and full professors as well. Now, this is, I think, is really interesting. So you can become a full professor of teaching practice, as it will, through the quality of your teaching and the impact of your teaching and influence within your department, within your faculty, within your institution, and internationally beyond. So level E in Australia means full professor. Now, if we look around the world, you can see there's a lot of other universities that have similar kind of models. So you've got here Harvard University. You could be promoted at Harvard University to a full professor of practice at King's College in London, University of British Columbia, University College London, National University of Singapore, MIT, University of Manchester, and Duke University, all highly regarded universities. You can, as an academic, you can elect to focus on education for your career or for part of your career. And I think that's fantastic. And that enables them to do things as individuals, as groups, that they wouldn't have the time for, the focus to do if they had to only get research as their main output for tenure and for their promotion. So, for example, last year at UNSW, we had 8 promotions to lecturer, 13 to senior lecturer, 5 to associate, and 2 to full professor. And that was just last year. And of course, there's lots of awards and a growing number of awards. The Higher Education Academy Fellows, we had 4 new ones. We had 5 as became senior fellows, 10 University Vice Chancellor Awards. We had 3 Student Choice Awards for academics, 2 Exemplary Teaching Practice Awards, and 7 new CNT Education Academy Fellows as well, identified as excellent in their own sphere of teaching from their own faculty. So this is very much peer review within their own disciplines, and I think that's good. Again, in trying to expand this notion of the importance of education within an institution, we set up lots of communities of practice, COPs, for which over 600 academic staff regularly contribute. So they take part in these. There's 13 COPs in areas such as digital assessment. How can we improve in digital assessment? In areas like student feedback, in areas like academic integrity, which of course is a major area that we've had to really boost since the massive increase of digital learning and teaching, particularly during the COVID period and post. Course design, how working in a digital environment means we have to think more carefully about our course and program design, online learning, using such tools as Microsoft Teams, and also face-to-face. We have a lot of workshops, we have seminars, we have retreats, special workshops, professional development workshops and seminars, annual education-focused retreats and symposia, blogs and resources on hot topics such as ChatGPT. The Deputy Vice Chancellor there, I've left you a link from the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, Merlin Crossley, who's well known for his research in science, has really started getting interested in the possibilities and the problems created by ChatGPT. So go in and have a look at that if you're interested. And I think today, being the anniversary, the first day that Google has put up its competitor to ChatGPT, and it's calling it the Bard. I tried to get into it this morning and I wasn't allowed to get in, but from what I've seen in terms of the reviews, it looks like it's going to be a very interesting and powerful AI, and there's going to be lots of positives and negatives with it, I'm sure. And of course, other topics like assessment, academic integrity, assessment security, and implications for returning to paper-based assessments, which is something that we're grappling with at the moment at my university. Or do we still keep the majority of them online, or do we start to gradually reintroduce that paper-based assessments that we had before? Visiting teaching fellowship schemes, design and development of physical learning spaces. What sort of places do students need to provide them to maximize the opportunities to assist them in their learning? And we looked around at other universities at what they were doing. And of course, I had the experience of here and the fantastic learning spaces that have been created at UNSW, at the University of Hong Kong. And so those were thrown in to the mix. We had the same kind of major university interactive initiative between all teachers, between the academics, between students, between partners. What kind of learning spaces do we want, and how can we create them? I think one of the things that we spent more time on than UNSW has is probably because of the climate. We actually focused a lot on actually creating learning spaces outside in the open air. We didn't need to worry quite so much about the mosquitoes, the high level of humidity, and the kind of culture we have here of being inside protected against that dangerous outside. Changes in education and program policies and procedures. This was really important as well. we set up committees that specialized and looked in different policies. We felt we had too many policies, our policies were too long. We needed to simplify them and clarify them and make sure they focused around our vision and our strategy for the university as well, what we were intending to do to make this university an intensive education university. And for those of you that might be interested, again, those hot links go to the policies with regard to curriculum that I've been talking about. So if you like, you can actually go into there. And one of the things you'll see is that we've simplified our policy documents to roughly 2 pages. And then we've then created procedures which are much more complicated, which then go on the implementation of the policies, but again, still broad, so that all faculties can implement those policies across their entire curriculum. Now, central to the structure of the curriculum was the integrated curriculum framework, which is this very simple model here. And again, it's not new. You will see this in many institutions, this kind of thing, where every program, whether it's new or old, has to address things from the top down. It has to say, okay, in what sense is this program, this degree, related to the university's 2025 strategy? How does it interrelate with the university's graduate capabilities? We're expecting all our graduates to have certain capabilities. So all of your programs need to have that link. Obviously, the program learning outcomes need to link to, for example, and all the course learning outcomes need to show clear links between the courses that make up the program and, of course, the graduate capabilities of the university. Underneath that, of course, you've got the course and course components, and they need to articulate clearly how they relate to the course learning outcomes, to the program learning outcomes, and to the graduate capabilities. Then, of course, the same with the assessments, and these then need to be evaluated in terms of how closely they address that connection between the elements of the integrated curriculum framework through the committees that review our programs in a sort of a light review every 2 years and a more harder review every 5 years or so that our programs do get continuously reviewed to ensure they conform. And of course, if they don't, then it's up to the faculties who, if you like, own those courses and programs to then make the changes and then resubmit their applications. If they're not accepted, then those courses have to be closed down. Okay. So in terms of the, and those of you that no doubt are familiar with RAISE, which has actually been created by Daniel Churchill, we found this was a very useful model as well. So we actually built this model into the integrated curriculum framework and mentioned it within our policies and procedures as well. That courses, if we look at the course design model, have resources, and that these resources are very important, but the most important thing is probably the activities we give students to do in order to successfully complete their course. What kind of supports do students need, both from tutors, what kind of supports do tutors need, what technical support, etc. And then evaluation. How do students evaluate how well they're doing as they're working their way through the course? And this is particularly important when you're working in a totally online environment, when you're working during COVID, when you're not meeting your teachers, when your teachers are at this distance. So how can students evaluate how well individual students are going? How can the teachers evaluate how the students are doing as well? So that model we found very, very useful. The components of it, the resources are, of course, the content and the tools enable students to learn. The activities is working on the tasks to achieve the learning outcomes. What kind of support is needed, the peer, the tutor, the technical, to resolve emerging difficulties in those areas, and what kind of structured, formative ways to identify and improve student progress as they're working their way through the course. So looking at the model in a different way, you can say here, this one is showing the integrated curriculum framework with the resources course model fitting into that framework. And we've used that model, for example, in micro-credentialing, so that if you have a course and you have a small component of that course, which you've micro-credentialed, the whole thing can then fit into this model. So you can have multiple mini models, but if they're put together, then they form a course. Now, this is useful when you have it structured in this way, of course. When you then look at those small modular components beyond the micro-credentialing, those micro-credential components could be a MOOC, could be a wet lab, could be projects, field studies, could be virtual labs or work placements within the integrated curriculum framework itself. This is also useful in then reviewing the curriculum. So these micro-credential components are agile and hybrid in the sense that those modules can be a course on its own, a short course on its own. It could be 1 or 2 or 3 or more short courses leading to continual professional development. So, for example, for lawyers, for teachers, etc., who need to show a certain number of hours of continual CPD every year, then doing these extra courses, we can offer them that. But at the same time, if they then want to put those together, it could lead to a degree, as long as it fits into the structure of the integrated curriculum framework. Or it could be finally something that is added on. Now, we find that some students in some subjects see there's a lot of other students which are competing for the same jobs as them. So they, on their testament, if they can say, not only have I got this degree in, say, business administration, but in addition to that, I did some extra courses, and these are on my testament. So you can add those in terms of a micro-credentialing. Now, for those of you that know Mark King also was from Hong Kong U and spent many years here. He came to join us at UNSW, and he developed a large-scale integrated multi-million-dollar funded project, which went on for many years. He led a team of 50 or 60 people working for him on these projects, and I'll very briefly go through those with you. The CNT Education Academy, this was an opportunity to kind of like formalize education within faculties and across the university. Saw that first year student experience was not always great. You know, a lot of first year students suffer when they come to university. They're used to a rather different kind of teaching style from coming in from the school angle, for example. So what kind of support can we give them? So really focusing on that. And then what kind of support can we provide students online in developing an online community? We got students to be involved very centrally in creating that. The digital uplift, this was the major component where we developed over 660 online courses, online and blended courses. And the timing was good because that was complete by the time COVID came. So we had, you know, that quite critical mass of courses ready to go online, and students were used to that. The summative peer review process, this was interesting because what we said was that, okay, so you're a teacher. If you want to go for promotion, if you want to go for tenure, if you want to go for continuing to work as a teacher and researcher in this university, you have to provide some kind of summative review. You have to have people, a mentor coming into your class and using a particular scale, looking at the quality of your teaching, looking at the quality of your student learning. So every teacher then went through this process. Digital assessment, this was an important one, particularly back in 2014. We were looking at lots of different digital assessment tools and applications, which one would work best. We looked at different models. Students as partners, we wanted to more formalize students from the early days, how they could be engaged in improving the quality of our teaching and learning, and improving the quality of the assessments we offer as well. And what we did, we put quite a lot of money into that. So we were able to pay students that were involved in actually helping us make improvements to our curriculum there. And that was useful in talking to students who received some money. We didn't give them lots of money, but we did give them money. That was always very appreciated. But they said what they liked about it was, that goes to show you're taking us seriously because you're actually giving us money. Right, so that was good. So that's a kind of like a summary, but in a sense, I've already said all of that. So I'll just leave that with you, and I'll answer any more questions that there may be more specifically about that later if you're desired. Another area that we started looking at just before COVID happened was all the lessons learned. We've got all this innovative practice happening across the university. We want to somehow find a way that we can consolidate and sustain this level of innovation within the university, across the university, beyond the university. How can we do that? So one of the things we did was that we had some workshops, we talked to teachers, we talked to students. Okay, well, let's think of what do we mean by education innovation? And we came across this from a University of Surrey, where they defined education innovation as an enhancement of existing practice, improving the quality of the learning opportunities. So with that, we thought, okay, well, we'll use that. And again, there's a hot text that links to that model. The purpose of the dimensions of educational innovation we wanted to look at was identifying innovative educational practices using technology. We wanted to develop the dimensions of educational innovation framework to be used as a professional development tool for teachers, but also for peer review and to monitor change and innovation in education practices in the institution. So those were big asks. So we wanted to identify innovative practices. You can put up your hand saying, hey, I'm doing some really innovative practice in the course I'm teaching in microbiology, and I think I've got some things here that would be very useful for someone teaching in a different discipline. So here's an opportunity for you. You can write it up. Let's have a look at it in terms of how innovative that course is. You say it's innovative, let's have a look. Let's see if we've got a dimension we can look to see, we can map it, and also give you an opportunity to actually improve on that innovation, to grow on that innovation. The looking at the professional development tool for teachers, I think this is very interesting because this is saying, okay, let's recognize innovation, and we can do that through this way, of your teaching. That's great. But how can we use it to further develop your skills as a teacher, but also to share those skills you've got with peers, with peer reviews, and to monitor change and innovation of those educational practices across the institution? The one thing we felt that we had to accept, and I think this is really important in lessons learned from innovative practices, in talking to teachers from across all disciplines, was that there are signature pedagogies. In other words, that what is innovative in one discipline is not necessarily innovative in another. So the simple examples I've got there is that in first year law, you have a semicircular theatre where everyone is facing each other and you work on case dialogue methods. So it's individual students asking questions about the case and analysing reasoning. That's just everyday, ordinary teaching in law. If you take that concept and you shift it into another discipline, it's innovative, right? It's something that is not the norm in another faculty. And those other examples there in engineering, first year engineering, as well as engineering design, are other examples. I can remember, for example, I went to a class in maths where this teacher was in a large lecture theatre, and he had a big blackboard. He insisted on the blackboard, not a whiteboard, and he never turned around to look at the students at all. He was just putting up figures, rubbing them out, and then putting up figures and showing how things added to this and adding to that, and saying that. Students were taking copious notes, and they were tremendously interested in what he was doing, and he was very similar, but they never saw his face. But he was doing everything actually online. As you know, he was a good teacher, but if you use that method in my discipline, education, you would say, hey, you're not even facing your students, you're not engaging with the students. But he just wasn't looking. So here are the dimensions. So the dimensions, we borrowed a lot, again, from Professor Nancy Law et al. And their work in the site study in particular, where they look particularly at the teachers' roles, the students' roles, and the roles of the technology. But in our institution, workshopping this, the teachers said we really need to look at other dimensions. And one is the community and the community involvement, both within the class. How much of the community from outside the class are you bringing in? Okay, and how much from, you get an expert from outside who's coming into the classroom, beaming in through Zoom or some other ways. And what about the communities beyond this classroom of getting students to link with the professions outside the physical class, but being introduced to, for example, architects, if they're studying architects with architects in companies on projects, and then looking at the overall impact of the work that you're doing. If it is an innovation, how impactful is it? This came about because in Australia at the time, when we were talking about this, if you went for a national teaching grant, you needed to address what was termed as the impact factor. How impactful is this? If we're going to give you $1 million, what is your expectation in terms of the impact and influence of this innovation you're doing, not only to your own students, but to other students across the university, beyond the university and other institutions, maybe beyond those universities across the nation and maybe internationally as well. So where do you fit on that scale? So that's why we brought in that level. And then the levels in terms of the degree of innovation, we looked at existing practices, and this comes straight from Professor Nancy Law et al. Was it the same practices you'd done before? That's your starting point. If you look at the model there, the blue is the existing practice. If you then stretch that, if you've done some innovative elements, that would fit into the some new elements. That's moving towards the level 2 areas. Emergent practice, and this is where something quite significant you can identify as being innovative is occurring. So that's level 3, and then the innovative, and then the most innovative 4 or 5. So you can see that this would grow. Now, what the teachers liked about this is they saw this was a continuous process. So in 1 year, they may roughly fall along the, if you look at the orange lines there, slightly innovative, but there is their potential for them if they try to grow those other dimensions in terms of changing teachers' roles, students' roles, communities, technologies, and impact factors. They could grow out to, say, level 5, which is most innovative. They could move that way. Okay, so that was something that we thought we could use in online templates, dimensions of innovation for teachers to self-assess their own levels of innovation. Because if a teacher comes to you and says, I'm doing something really innovative, and then they show it to a peer, and they think, well, actually, no, I've been doing that for a long time. It's not particular. Tell me, why do you think it's innovative? And then that kind of discussion can then help that really become an innovation in itself. Developing templates to be used in workshops, so for self and peer assessment of levels of innovation, where they can talk to each other about their innovations. Completed templates can be used as a catalyst in academic career conversations with mentors, as evidence of for the HEA and Learning and Teaching award schemes, and to include in personal teaching portfolios when they're wanting to go for promotion, for example, if they're an education-focused person. And hopefully moving towards identifying innovation and change in educational practices, both in individual courses and in groups of courses and faculties across the university and beyond. So that was the model that we used. Now, experiences shared and lessons learned from all of this, that during COVID, quite clearly in our university, there was a lot of innovation happening, a lot of fantastic resources being developed. How could we sustain this? How could we share this? We knew there was a lot of good stuff because actually when we looked at the student evaluations from our students during COVID, compared to pre-COVID, our evaluations of the quality of our teaching went up, not down. That's pretty good. I know it's a broad indicator. It doesn't mean too much, but it's just an indicator. But it's interesting that the students really appreciated what we were trying to do, what our teachers were trying to do, and they gave us higher scores. And there is a national score across all universities in Australia. There's something like 50 universities in Australia. We moved up the scale. How much you can read into this is, very questionable. But anyway, it's a broad indicator that we're roughly moving in the right direction. Post-pandemic, so how best can we sustain this and transfer this in a post-pandemic time? It's obviously clear that we need to share good practice and innovative practices in a proven way to enhance learning and teaching. And I've mentioned that text, which was very influential, certainly in my thinking. The importance of having good mechanisms and groups, such as the Education Focus and the Education Focus communities of practice, the CNT Education Fellows, the faculty, CNT Fellows, the faculty and the Pro-Vice Chancellor in Education Student Experience, experts and services and committees in helping push the agenda forward in terms of promoting education. So the university is certainly moving in the right direction to become known for its education and not just its research. The power of offering teachers frameworks is, I think, indisputable now, because having the integrated curriculum framework, having more simple, clear policies has clearly helped in improve the quality of our programs and courses. Having models to help us understand and summarize, identify and compare good and innovative practices. All these are efforts to actually improve the quality of teaching learning. Capacity building of our teachers and our students. This is really important, particularly when it comes to working in technology. It's a complicated matter when you start to work in technology. It doesn't always work, and I proved that with this very simple tool here, how the technology is constantly falling over and it's not doing what it's supposed to do, what you expect it to do. So building up those skills and also expectations. How do you deal with things when they don't work? And technology so often doesn't work, but it does work a lot of the time. So, and identifying individual and our peer assessments and progression in more systemic ways, we felt was really important. We need frameworks and models to consolidate and identify and connect our multiple and spread resources that we've got across the university, but we need to show the connectivity between them, and we do that through our models and our frameworks. The power of making changes through our policies. I noticed since we created those policies prior to COVID, none of those have changed. Policies we didn't want to change. We wanted to get it right and make broad enough statements so they could follow formative changes that are happening. But the procedures that are then addressed by the faculties, by the schools, right out there across the university, some of those procedures have been altered and changed. And again, you can see that because it's got, when you go into those policies and procedure documents, that the procedure documents has been updated. So you can expect changes to procedures, but hopefully we're not going to get changes to policies for many years to come. Therefore, that gives that stability for staff in thinking about curricula. Very important, we felt. So the takeaways, the conclusion of all of this, thinking about the challenges to higher education practices, the technology catalyzing change in a post-COVID time. For me, I think there's three top takeaways that we can learn from this. The first for us very strongly is this notion of systemic approaches to change during and beyond COVID at an institutional level, really looking quite big. But also make sure that within the faculties themselves, there is systemic change, and this is recorded and monitored through the faculty boards, etc., right up to the university level. Every institution needs agreed, shared design models and frameworks, such as the integrated curriculum frameworks such as the RAISE, the frameworks, the mental models that we can give to our teachers to help them improve. And I think we have to remember that, and you've all heard this before, higher education profession is one of those few places still in existence where you can become a higher education professor and teacher without ever getting a qualification in teaching in higher education, or without any understanding of teaching and learning. So it is important that we give all the teachers across the university, these models and frameworks that they can work on. I should also mention that at my university, everyone that comes to our university as a teacher is required to do some of our courses. Teaching courses. It's compulsory. It's not an option. They have to do it. If they don't do it, they don't get their promotion. They don't get their tenure. So they need to show, that common platform level of understanding in terms of how their students learn and how they can help improve their students to learn. So we've got to think about capability building across the institution, key to ensuring good use of shared frameworks, new pedagogies, good and innovative practices. So that's it. Those, I think, are the takeaways. Again, coming back to comparing Hong Kong U and UNSW, we can all listen and learn from each other. And I think that's really interesting. As I said to you earlier, I was able to take to UNSW lots of fantastic concepts, ideas, and physical spaces in terms of learning commons that were created, especially when the Centennial Campus was created, and thinking about how those were used. And they were tremendously influential for us in UNSW, in ideas for what we could do and how we could extend that. I think likewise, there may be something that we've done at UNSW that may be useful to Hong Kong U in this, hopefully, permanently post-pandemic period. We're going to still have COVID, but hopefully it's going to be post. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fox. This is a wonderful and very insightful presentation. So now is the question and answer time. So for everybody, both physically here or we have a question over there, and also for folks online. If you have any questions, just post in the chat. We'll help you to ask. But please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you for kind of sharing. It's quite interesting. And I have two questions. The first one about the thing you mentioned about the teaching track. For me, I think that okay. So I'm a doctoral student and in education, and I found that researching is part of I can't say learning, but it is. I mean that as a student, I think that involving the kind of program or project that my supervisor is doing is quite beneficial for me. So I'm not sure, does the teaching track really, why do you think that design that? Because as you mentioned, I think even for researching track, it's necessary for them to teach, right? But why for the teaching track, it's not that necessary for them to research? Does that mean that? And I'm also asking, is that also another kind of inequality, like their payments or other aspects? Okay, so that's my first question. And my second question is that during the pandemic, actually, we all experienced that. So for me, I think I actually lost a lot during the pandemic because I lost the chance to communicate with my colleagues, my classmates, and also I think that what we use is not that obvious. For example, the kind of intercultural communication, this kind of loss, especially in the transnational communication, it becomes less obvious. So we believe that we kind of integrate the kind of imaginary community, the online community, but actually we're not. So we even do not know the adaptation process. I'm not sure if you've got any research about that.
Well, I can certainly talk a little and then share with others, and I'm sure we've all got some ideas to that. But your first one here, it's a great question to say, if an academic decides to then focus on their teaching rather than just research, will this disadvantage them in the future? For example, if they move between institutions that don't have education focus, and quite suddenly, they don't have the research output that's necessary to push them up. And we've talked about that a lot. I think that's I think a good point. There's no simple solution there. What we're focusing on, though, is we've given the teachers that individually elect to go down this track, that we can give them a strong structure for their academic careers by focusing on teaching and learning and the quality of their teaching and learning. And they can start to identify impact factors of the quality of their student output and the quality of their teaching, which will be part of their teaching portfolio, which will get, if they want to move in between institutions, they can use to say, okay, I haven't done as much research output as this other person, but I have done, I can evidence these impact factors, which have influenced not only my students, but also other students and teachers within my institution and beyond. So is this going to be useful to you in your institution? So it's actually trying to shift. It's not saying that research is not important. Research is definitely important. But does an institution only need to employ academics that focus purely on research? Can we not actually say, okay, we'll give you a time to focus purely on education? You can switch out of that later and come back and have what model we've got. Normally, we're like a 40-40-20 split in terms of percentage. You do supposedly 40% research, 40% teaching, 20% services, community, etc. The reality is that we rarely fall cleanly into those. But the opportunity we've given our teachers who decide to go down the education focus is 80%. You can focus on teaching and learning and focus on the quality of teaching and learning. You can actually start to document then that the changes that you have made. So I think that's significant, but it is always up to the individual. The fact that universities like Harvard do this, I think shows us that there is a room in a traditional research-led university like the University of Hong Kong to consider this notion of education focus very seriously. That's what I think. Now, your second, I think that's right. We all suffered, didn't we, during COVID? I think the advantage that we had was that we had already produced just so many. By that stage, we'd produced 21 MOOCs, and we'd built those into our programs. We'd produced 660 online and blended courses. So our students across all faculties were already kind of starting to acclimatize to parts of their study being online. So I think we had that advantage and growth. So it wasn't so we weren't so impactful on that. The fact that we created already all those communities of practice, as I say, we have 600 academics that are regularly interacting in those communities of practice. And of course, now post-COVID, we've got the physical meetups now. But during COVID, of course, everything was online. I must admit, I got fed up of Zoom meetings. I got fed up with teaching through Zoom. And I'm sure my students did. And it's such a strange technology. You've got to work differently. And at the end of one Zoom, I'd be exhausted. And then I had to build up my strength to go into the next one. So by the end of the day, when you've done about 5 or 6 Zoom meetings or classes, you're exhausted, but you build up that fitness and you gradually use it. But I definitely prefer face-to-face, definitely. But I think for us, we're, as an institution, not going to go back. we're not going to go back to fully face-to-face. There are just so many advantages. For example, thinking about assessments and the traditional face-to-face assessments we had, where we had to hire, across the road from our university, we had this large racing track called the Randwick horse racing track with these huge vast hallways. So we had to rent these to fill them up with our students, almost like cattle, so they could do the written exams under invigilation. Well, during COVID, we got rid of them all. So we had to think, okay, this course, this program is about this, this, and this. Those are the program learning outcomes. These are course learning outcomes. In what way do students need to evidence that they have achieved these learning outcomes? Those courses, which were purely face-to-face, invigilated in those large rooms, let's see what changes we can make and still address the learning outcomes. And we found solutions. We actually found solutions so that we managed to get rid of many. I think in medicine, I think medicine is something it did some interesting things. They did some interesting things before COVID as well, but where they said, well, look, you know, in the different years in teaching students to become a doctor of medicine, there are sets of courses that have to be done together. So rather than assessing the output of student performance in, say, this course, this course, this course individually, let's not assess them as one individual course. Let's assess them in a group of courses because they need to know all of that stuff. This course, this course, and then together we will then assess them. So, so medicine is an example of where they've simplified assessment of a very complex curriculum, as you can imagine in medicine, but successfully, and they've won national awards for it. So I do understand that concern about the pandemic and the capability and the, you know, the intercultural communication problems created in that time. And we definitely suffered from that too. And I mean, for example, I did workshops online with universities in other countries, which normally I would have done face-to-face. For example, in Singapore, I was at the LaSalle College, and I had a whole day workshop which had to be conducted online. Oh, it was frightening, but I had to find a way. Well, I used the RAISE model, so I had to find a way of ensuring that there was a high percentage of student activity going on out there. And that also gave me a break to stand back and then listen to how solutions they'd come up with. So there are many lessons that we've learned from that dreadful experience. And I know it was tough on us, but post-pandemic, we should be reflecting on all of those things, thinking how we can actually improve our curricula and the delivery of our curricula, which enables us to still use that technology and what we've learned to improve the quality of our face-to-face teaching. And not make our teaching exclusively face-to-face only, and not make our assessments exclusively face-to-face only. I know that there's whole new sets of other problems, for example, academic integrity, student cheating, there's all kinds of things, you know, the digital diploma mills, but these are problems that need to be looked at face-to-face and resolved. We should be able to do this. No easy solutions.
Thank you for your wonderful sharing. And I want to ask one question that regarding her question is that I want to know if you can share about the amazing track from the lecturer to a professor. I would like to know if it is something that adds to the diversity of the career development path. And I happen to know from my friend that she's from a different discipline, something related to medicine or clinic. She knows that in her area, she can go from a researcher to a professor. So she does not need to teach anything. So I think this is an amazing opportunity as well. And a second thing that I want to share a simple thing that may be a benefit that during the pandemic time is that when we gave seminar like confirmation during before the pandemic, we need to give face-to-face seminars, so not many students will come to join. But during the pandemic, as I gave my confirmation online on Zoom, actually many classmates joined our confirmation. So
Yeah.
there is more feedback from my friends.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing those experiences and the comments. I think that's great. I think, yeah, there is, we need to just keep on reflecting on, as reflective practitioners, we need to reflect on what we learned, what worked well and what didn't, and how we can engage in and address the problems that we're identifying as well that happened during that. How can we learn from it and position ourselves best in this post-pandemic era? Who knows, unfortunately, we might be falling back into it again. Maybe it's not COVID, maybe it's something else that will force us back. So we really do need to learn from that. But I was here when we had SARS, and during that, we had some harsh lessons that we had to learn. But we did learn a lot from that experience, and we grew as an institution because of that experience.
Yeah. So I guess along that questions about the incentives of moving to the education focus, careers or pathway. I think it's a very interesting pathway for those who want to focus on the educational development and innovation, and sort of like giving them incentive to dive deeper in developing themselves as a professional teachers in higher education. So I think this is remarkable. But the ideas of this scheme is also asking the colleagues to move away from their academic research. Of course, if they're researchers in non-higher education centers, then they'd be more interested in other research activities which may not be related to their higher education sector. So let's say for a pre-tenure assistant professors, and once they start the tenure clock and so the clock ticks, and then all of a sudden they think, oh, maybe I want to just move to the education, focus a career for let's say 5 years, and then jump back to the tenure clock. So is that an option? So if that is an option, how could the university support these sort of colleagues who actually stop their research in their original areas and then focus on their educations, and then still be able to go back into their research to pick up those things that have been developed over those 5 years, because research go quite rapidly sometimes. And
absolutely,
you stop it for stop reading for papers like 1 or 2 years, and you come back, it's in other world. So how does the university deal with this sort of situation, particularly for those who are in junior faculty? Well,
I think to begin with, you have to think in terms of, okay, the purpose of the university. If you're looking at it in the big thing, in the big scale, you're looking at the purpose of the university is maybe twofold. One, it's there to engage in research, but the other one is to teach. And you could say they're equal. So if you do think of them as equal, and I believe they should be considered equal, then you need to give those that are engaged that opportunity equally. So if you want to take down that track of being research, and you want to that traditional track, or you can choose that alternate track, which you may want to be for your entirety of your career in higher education. Switching between the two back and forward is very open to, there's no simple solution to this. I've not come across that shift back, but there are just so many advantages for the individual, both through promotion, getting up to full professor through just engaging in teaching and learning rather than in research, but also for the institution and for the educational importance within the institution, that it's worth having this. So the total number of kind of full-time academics, I can't remember now how many we've got, but I recall it's over 3,000 sort of full-time equivalent. And then there's lots of part-timers, but I'm only talking about full-timers. So you've got 3,000, and after that, you've got 450 who are education focused. And we've got young people who've started to engage in that. I was talking to a postdoc student about this quite recently, about one person in physics who was a really great, before she came to university, she was a school teacher, but she became a research track academic and was doing well, and she'd been promoted from assistant lecturer to lecturer, and then to senior lecturer. But she's very interested in teaching because of her experience in teaching, and she sees the value of helping her students increase the quality of their student learning. She switched over to education-focused track. A couple of years ago, she got promoted to associate professor, and she's now looking towards becoming a full professor in that track. So for that kind of person, this is wonderful, because actually she's been able to accelerate her promotions that would be far harder had she remained in that. And in her area, because of her area of expertise, if she wanted to switch to another institution in physics, she would have no problem. No problem, whether it's in Australia or beyond. And remember, it's not just the young institutions like ours that are doing it, it's also traditional institutions like Harvard that are doing it too. So I think it's in, or Duke, which is also traditional, might be considered a traditional university, is introducing it too. So I think it's something that Hong Kong U should seriously consider, both for the quality of its teaching, which is great, of course, but also for the quality of its employees as well, in terms of teaching and taking teaching seriously. I keep on coming back to this point that we may have good teachers, but teachers can learn a lot from the theory of how students learn, a great deal. But you need to give them an opportunity to do this. If all their readings have to be around their own research, they're never, ever going to be able to understand much about their student learning from a theoretical point of view. This gives them the opportunity to do that, which means that when they come back to their research could include all of this new knowledge they've gained in understanding how students learn, for example, in mind discipline.
We're kind of running out of time, but I kind of have a follow-up question that I asked already. Yeah. So actually following up on this issue I've been talking about, an educational focused career path, I see two places there's a little bit misalignment. Number one is the culture that we all have been developing in the field, and also an ideal proposal of teaching and research being pretty equal. The culture right now, I think, going on in academia for really just right now is research is everything, research is important, research is more important than teaching, and research is harder than teaching, which is totally not the case, I think. So we have, yes, we all want to put these two things in an ideal structure, equally weighted in university structure, but it seems that the reality, the culture that we have been developing is really pushing us away from achieving this goal. So this is one observation. Another observation, actually, I think you have also mentioned that university professors is one of the few professions that do not need a qualification, right? In our doctoral training, and I believe in any parts of the any programs in this world, we do not provide rigorous training for anyone to go through a more teaching focused program. So it's kind of, we just hope them to know how to teach, which is a very challenging task for many of them. So I appreciate all the mental models, all the structures you have developed and provided to our, I guess, new faculty members. But then this misalignment between our training, our doctoral training, and a future career path also creates a lot of problems. So do you have any? I really appreciate your comments on there's no simple solution, and I totally agree with that. But any ideas how we might be able to address these misalignments?
Well, yeah, I think being a traditional university at the University of Hong Kong, you face more levels of complexity with this than we do as a catalytic integration institution. But you can use salami tactics, which is you cut things up into small bits, and there are certainly some things you can do. I would say it's extremely complicated to deal with, and I wouldn't like to actually provide any solutions that Hong Kong U should take. But I think it should take it seriously, and it's got to remember that, I mean, we're here not just for the research, but we're here for changing students, providing them with opportunities, teaching them so they can have successful careers. Now, I was reading an article this morning in the Times, I read, that was saying, this is particularly in Australia, we've now got far too many PhDs. There's no jobs for them. There's no jobs. So we've got to be careful about producing all of this, highfalutin PhD level people, if in the end, there's nothing for them to do. Their academic careers is zilch, no chance that any of them, or most of them, will get an academic career, because we've already got all of that. So that's a fact. I think we do need to think that the teaching career is very important for existing and for future. And that maybe our doctoral students, if they're focused on, or even if they're not focused on becoming teachers, they should be engaged in teaching themselves and then learning how to teach. And that's something that we do and have done as tradition in my university. So all doctoral students are required to be engaged in some form of teaching, and they're provided with they're required to take a basic course. It's called Beginning to Teach. And if you go to that Education Focus Staff website that I gave you, those are the courses. So Beginning to Teach, this is for our postdocs in how to teach. We also do the Foundations of University Teaching, and that's a MOOC. So our students, our teachers do that, and that's a compulsory one. They haven't got an education qualification, they have to do that. And then we give them opportunities to then do a postgraduate qualification. We call it GCALT, the graduate, what's it called? It's Graduate Diploma in University Learning and Teaching. That's what GCALT stands for. And then there is the Masters of Education for higher education. They can do that. And then, of course, there are the PhD levels and the doctoral levels that you can take. So we need to provide qualifications for our teachers that they can do. There's nothing wrong with a teacher who's got a PhD in chemistry also having a PhD in education. And we could structure that in such a way that it would help that teacher become a better teacher.
Well, I think, as you have said, it's extremely complicated, and there are a lot of different components and a lot of things that we need to juggle in this endeavor. With that said, I think, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, and I think we all have taken a lot from it, and also a lot to think about and reflect on, as you have suggested. Nothing else. Well, thank you so much for being here, Mr. Fox. And
My
thank
pleasure.
you so much for this wonderful seminar, and thank you all for joining us today. We'll see each other in the next side event.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the opportunity to come back here. And thank you for your questions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.